In front of me, there's a character that many of you may have already recognized, and if you haven't, I assure you that you've consumed their content because it's Gaby Kesselman, who is the director of her channel on social media, CC Emperatriz, and whose influence reaches millions and millions of people. And the craziest thing of all is that Gaby didn't start years ago and doesn't have all this background. In fact, I'm going to present a bit of Gaby's academic background. She is a lawyer. Nowadays, you can see that she has a great influence on public opinion, to the point that politicians quote her, academics quote her, especially journalists. So a lot of the information or the echo of the narrative that you hear, its root is here in this live we're doing, in this interview we're doing. And I'm going to leave in the description of this video her social media accounts on Twitter and any other networks she has. Welcome to the page, Jewish Philosophy. We met this morning, but you told me a very impactful phrase that you thank the Hamas terrorists for your Judaism. How? What do you mean by that?
I was raised in a home with a Jewish mom and dad, without any kind of tradition. My Bobby was the only one who made Pesach, but she didn't do a Seder, she just made a dinner where we all went. My Bobby has 2 children.
For the audience, Bob means grandmother. Yes.
Exactly. She's my father's mother, whose name was Kata, 2 children and 7 grandchildren. And nobody, absolutely nobody, cared about religion. She didn't pass it on to her children. I was the only one who cared about it a little bit. I was the one who accompanied her to the temple on the Day of Atonement, but nothing that went any deeper. In fact, for me, it wasn't even important to marry a Jewish man or to have a Jewish home. Nothing like that was relevant until I met my husband, who was Jewish. And at that moment, we both felt the urgent need for what we called building a Jewish home. It was essentially just sending the kids to a Jewish school, nothing more. When we got married, my husband's cousin, who lived here in Israel, asked us what she should give us as a gift, and we called it the Jewish kit. This was because we had nothing. We didn't have a menorah. We didn't know how to do Shabbat. One day I was walking down the street and 2 boys approached me. I assume now that they were from Chabad Lubavitch, and they gave me 2 candles and gave me instructions on how to light them for Shabbat. There was a small connection which mattered to me and my husband, as we wanted our children to have what we discussed. Jewish education, but now in Buenos Aires it's Bialik. It's a school where, let's see, the 3-year-old classroom is called something like the Little Clown's Room. Maybe it's called that in Hebrew, but it wasn't much more than that. It wasn't really relevant. My kids' Hebrew teachers always laugh because I used to tell them, don't bother them with Hebrew. They're never going to use Hebrew. And let's tell people that we live here. 3 years ago, but it was impossible. There was no chance. Judaism for me was just more Judaism. I had read books about the Shoah, the Holocaust, the Auschwitz dancer, big bestsellers. It was something that had happened. There were no Holocaust survivors. Nothing was happening. Yes, what happens is that once you light the Shabbat candles, you can never stop lighting them because you feel it. Like this thing. It's like when you always play the same lottery number and one day you stop playing and you say, is it too risky to stop playing? What if it actually comes up? And that's kind of what happened to us. But my brother had moved to live in Israel many years ago. And when he told me, because I didn't know Israel, I made Aliyah. I came to live in Israel without ever having been to Israel before. I didn't have social media. I just had a tiny Twitter account. Until the massacre of October 7th, and what I say is that on October 7th, my DNA exploded. That's how I describe it. Suddenly, something that was clearly dormant in me came out in an almost inexplicable way. But I found that I didn't have any information. And I always say my beginnings were without even knowing that Israel had unilaterally withdrawn from Gaza in 2005. I felt that something about the story wasn't right, that we were being accused of things that weren't real, but I didn't have any arguments to justify it. But I'm a lawyer, and lawyers have this ability to look for information, to know how to search for information, to retain information.
And not just believe any story, also to fight with the information in the sense of really chewing it over.
And besides, injustice is something that has always outraged me. And let's remember that beyond the shocking images of the massacre on October 7th, and I was in Israel a year ago, my brother, who had rented me the apartment where I live, which is on the first floor, which doesn't have bars, a first floor without bars, that's unimaginable in Buenos Aires. So when he showed me a picture of a first floor window wide open, I asked, "Where are the bars?" And he laughed and told me, "In Israel, you don't need them." On October 7th at 6:29 a.m., when the siren sounded, my brother called and told me, "Go to the shelter." And also close all the shutters and all the windows, and don't open the door to anyone because it's believed there are infiltrated terrorists. And he told me, "I don't think the images we're seeing on social media are real because honestly, even today we feel like those images can't be real. But just in case, no one should go out on the street." And we remember that on October 8th, there were already demonstrations around the world against Israel. That Israel hadn't even responded to the October 7th massacre yet. And the world was asking us for proportionality. The first thing I thought of as a lawyer was proportionality. They're asking me to go in and kidnap 250 people when at that moment we didn't even know how many there were to kidnap people. Is there someone who's not asking me to commit these illegal acts, which are all in the penal code? And so I started reaching out to people who were very generous with me because my question was, where do I start reading? It's like if tomorrow you wanted to learn about bee pollination and you said, "I don't have any reference, I don't have any information, I just feel like there's something I need to know." I've become much more spiritual and religious since the massacre on October 7th, and many times I'll tell you, my guidance just comes to me, I say, as if at times I were a channel receiving information. But I have to admit that since October 7th until now, which has been almost 2 years, I haven't stopped reading and preparing myself at any moment. But I didn't have any prejudices. I didn't need to defend Israel at all costs. And I'm convinced that my knowledge was so limited that I believed Israel was committing genocide, apartheid, and war crimes. I would have come out and said it. For me, being Jewish without prior knowledge didn't condition me. It allowed me to have enough open-mindedness to read both sides, as we lawyers say. I needed to read both accounts and confront what was happening. And from that moment on, I started reading. On October 8th or even late October 7th, as happened to us all, my WhatsApp was blowing up with people asking questions, and I realized there was no way I could respond to all those people. So at that time, I had a Twitter account with 5,000 followers. I used to say 5,000 people, which may sound like a lot, but now I have over 130,000. I said, let's start reading, but we're not going to be like the great academics that the Jews and Israelis are, who are known for their innovations, their discoveries, and their Nobel Prizes. People on the street aren't going to understand this, and I need to speak for the people on the street. I turned on the camera with no light or microphone and said, "Let me introduce myself. I have a really foul mouth. A lot of bad words just come out of my mouth spontaneously, and for me. Besides, there are things that need to be said with certain words. It's not the same to say, 'Oh, how silly,' as that word I'm not going to tell you because they'll censor us. It's not the same for someone to be silly as for someone to have other characteristics." And I imagined the following scene, as if I were a housewife wearing curlers, those things women put in their hair. And suddenly, I take off my apron. If I were peeling potatoes, Dad, I take off my apron, turn on the camera, and explain to regular people. People don't want long explanations. They don't want a bunch of dates or information. People want to understand, at best, people want to understand in a simple way what's going on. In Argentina, they say you have to talk to Mrs. Rosa. Mrs. Rosa is your mom, my mom, the grandmother. It's ordinary people to whom we're giving a lot of information about sinister events, about what was seen as a massacre, what was known to be the worst pogrom since the Holocaust. But on the other side, there were a lot of people, even from the West, who justified what was happening because they talked about the word oppression. So I sat down with people to whom I had to explain why what they were being told wasn't real, and why there was no such genocide, and why there was no such apartheid. That I didn't have to go look for a book. I knew there was no apartheid because I lived in Israel a year and a half ago, and my dentist is Arab, and because the buses have signs in Arabic. In fact, I have a very funny story. I arrived in Israel during the COVID period, and it was mandatory to wear a mask on the buses. They would say "Masaja" to me when I arrived in Israel without knowing Hebrew. Everything was complicated, and on the bus, I understood the first part of a message, but not the second. So I recorded the whole message and sat down with my brother and told him I didn't understand the second part. And my brother laughed and said, "Well, it's in Arabic. Don't you understand it?" I mean, for me, and I always say this, when I watched Fauda in Argentina, this Israeli series that's on now, which could also describe what's happening, I watched it in Argentina. And I couldn't tell when they were speaking Arabic and when they were speaking Hebrew. So at that moment, I said, well, what is certain is that there is no apartheid because the person who sells me medicine at the pharmacy is Arab. The street signs are written in English, Hebrew, and Arabic because on the bus they're speaking to me in Arabic. When you call any institution here, the phone options are 1 for Hebrew, 2 for Arabic, 3 for Russian, and 4 for English. They never answer in English, and there's not even an option for Spanish. And that day I understood. My mom calls it God's embroidery. Throughout my life, I studied a lot of unrelated things. I studied law, I took many literature workshops, and I studied theater. Nothing made sense until October 8th, when on October 8th I realized that everything I had studied had prepared me, so that on October 8th I could become a communicator and tell people what I was truly seeing, what I was really witnessing. On October 10th, I was at a base helping to pack food boxes for the soldiers without even knowing Hebrew. There was a WhatsApp group that asked, who can donate blood? For health reasons, I can't donate blood. Well, who can come to the base to help pack food boxes? They were boxes that had been stored for years, that hadn't been needed before, and now had to be opened. We had to take out the cans of corn that were going to expire in 15 days and replace them with new boxes of corn. And that day, I also understood completely what Israel is all about, as I say, the country of the Jews. What is our DNA? What is our essence? What is it? Because we were a lot of people. I'm covered in tattoos. Nothing could be more anti, maybe, than being covered in tattoos because we Jews aren't supposed to get tattoos, right? There were people with and without kippas, with and without wigs, all doing the same thing. And that day, I understood a lot of things. I understood who we are, who we were, and who we will always be. And I also understood why they hate us. Because they tried to destroy us so many times and they couldn't destroy us. And this sense of unity and strength and resilience makes it inevitable. If you don't feel empathy for the Jew, you end up hating them. Because since you can't destroy them, what you do is hate them.
Gaby is one of the most impressive stories, and many other characters throughout history come to my mind. Was it something similar? It's like there was a point in their lives when they made this change that led them to a path of greatness. Are you? I mean, the fact that you see politicians who are on a good path and they visit you, and suddenly I see you in interviews. This is 2 years. In my view, being on social media, it's like saying it happened overnight. On Twitter, especially, reaching those numbers isn't easy. I want to ask you if you think anyone has the potential to do that. I mean, me, a lot of people ask me, how can I defend Israel? Do I want to join the army? I tell them that there's a battlefield, which is the army, but there's another battlefield, which is the narrative. meaning what is presented on social media. The truth is, Israel is the little David facing a Goliath of lies. Do you think people could start a path on social media and end up having an impact like you or in other different ways?
Social media is like a big mystery because you never know why you get acceptance on social media. I think what people can do is inform themselves afterwards. I think it's an innate gift, the ability to communicate, and it's an innate gift to be able to turn something difficult into something easy. I didn't work on that, just like I told you. I spend hours reading and writing every day because I do it, because I practice it, and also because I'm an extremely curious person. And so I need to be sure that what the other person is telling me is true. ChatGPT often tells me, I already told you yes. And I say, are you sure that what you're telling me is really what I asked? This can't be. Everyone has the possibility of not being part of the pack. But I also say, and I always say it with a lot of irony and in a very dismissive way, but that's how I feel, and this is my way of communicating. I don't have filters when communicating. Several things happen, but mainly I lack filters. I value my own space and have lifelong friends, as well as a group I met after moving to Israel. And I have a family and I have children. I care about my own space. I can't understand how people care about what others say on social media. People who hide behind a picture of a dog and whose username is XXPQ, why would you care about what XXPQ says? I mean, I can't understand how that person could affect you at all. I care about what my children, my parents, my husband say to me. But someone you don't know, someone who's anonymous, I think you could inform yourself, but informing yourself means stepping out of your comfort zone. And also, there are people who haven't worked on their self-esteem. So if we have one bad person but 100 fools, and those 100 fools, for some reason, haven't worked on their self-esteem. And I always say either their parents didn't love them enough and didn't hug them enough, or they're lacking nutrients, or during pregnancy their mother didn't take folic acid. I always talk about more structural issues. And do you feel alone in life, alone, and you say, what can I do? Should I join a cause to save whales? Well, most likely not many people will join you. Now, if you're suddenly feeling alone, one of many lonely people, and notice the person next to you, grab a Palestinian flag and shout, Free Palestine, from the river to the sea. And suddenly there are 10, and suddenly there are 50, and suddenly there are 100. Suddenly you have 101 wicked people repeating a slogan they don't understand, but for the first time in their lives, it allows them to feel that they are part of something, that they are relevant, that someone is looking at them. Whether it's always Atris or Jacob or any of the people posting what they did on social media. Suddenly, these people feel like, wow, my moment of fame has arrived, my moment of glory has come. What happens to us with young actors? Do actors know how to act? Since when? When does an actor feel qualified to give an ethical speech on stage? Who gave them that authority? And suddenly a guy like Bardem appears, who is completely uneducated and incoherent. And he's incoherent because his son was born in a Jewish hospital and because his wife works for Jewish companies. But he feels that suddenly, if he puts on a tough face and clenches his fists like this, he suddenly feels that a lot of people are going to applaud him. And at this moment in history, they're going to applaud those people and not the ones who say there's no genocide in Israel. If your self-esteem is low and you have ego issues, it's an easy wave to ride. The thing is, these are people who can't stand the slightest scrutiny, and that's why they become violent. Because when you ask them from which river to which sea, they say, I don't know. When you tell them, if you're going to measure genocide based on the number of deaths, then is your conclusion that the Germans were the good guys and the Allies were the bad guys? And then do they block you or attack you? If you ask me if anyone could be Moshe and decide to leave Egypt, I'll tell you no, but anyone could be. The people who accompany Moshe leaving Egypt are the people who accompanied Moshe and shaped his identity as essential as Moshe himself. And that's what I say every time I turn on a camera. It takes two to tango. If you're going to speak to this channel or I'm going to speak on social media and there's no one on the other side, then the team doesn't make sense. We don't all need to go out and speak. What we need is for all of us to take action, all of us. In history, what begins with the Jews never ends with them. We're the canary in the coal mine, and we see this happening in the West. Hello? Has this happened to a Christian man in recent days just for speaking differently? It starts with, look at what he did, look at what he says, look at what he thinks. The next persecution is about what we think. And so it's okay that there are people who feel they don't have the gift of speaking, who don't have the ease of reading, but who are not going to let themselves be used, who are not going to let themselves be intimidated, and who have to realize that we are a broad country. As small as it is, if you add it up, you do the math. In the Middle East, Israel doesn't fit within the word Israel. You realize that for a physical reason, it's impossible that they were there first. When I refer to the Arabs, that they were there first, because for physical reasons, the temple was established first. So, gentlemen, it's like flipping the cake over. You have to think, but if you think, you run the risk of having to reconsider your convictions. Leaving the group that comforts you and putting yourself on the other side, where, for example, defending the Jews today isn't comfortable. So you need courage. If you don't have the courage, surround yourself with good people because there are a lot of us. There are a lot of people who, as I said, invest a lot of their time taking it away from their partner because time is finite. The time you and I spend on social media is time we take away from our partners, our children, our friends, and our loved ones. Because we believe it's important to talk, and because, as I always say, on October 8th, I started writing a book for my grandchildren, even though I don't have grandchildren. My children are 20 and 22. At some point, my grandchildren will ask, "What did you do?" And I want to have an answer. What did you do during the worst pogrom against the Jews? What did you do when Jews were being asked for explanations? There's a joke that says when Jews are accused of being thieves. It's not really because they think they've stolen the coins, but because they get a lot of pleasure from watching them empty their pockets. For the past 2 years, those of us on social media have been explaining that explaining that we're not committing genocide, that we're not the ones stealing humanitarian aid, that we're not the ones using civilians as human shields. In advocacy, it's hard to explain what you didn't do. It's rarely done. Imagine if I tell you, explain to me, show me that you didn't crash the car. How are you going to show me? Can you show me that you crashed the car? It's a very perverse situation for Jews, but I'm going to say something I've learned in the last 2 years. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. And I think the only big mistake we Jews made, and we must never make again, and that's why we have to study, we believed that the Holocaust was already over, that anti-Semitism had ended, that it was just a germ, that how could it possibly happen again? How could it have happened? We used to ask ourselves how it was possible, and today we know how it was possible, and today we understand what was possible. On October 7th, when they tried to commit a genocide, but they couldn't. They intended to commit a genocide and they couldn't. And we could have committed a genocide on October 8th and spared ourselves the 900 soldiers who died, defending us and putting their bodies on the line. We need to realize this will happen again, but we shouldn't be caught off guard. Our children and grandchildren need the tools I searched for on October 7th. They need to have them. They need to know where we come from, where we're going, how it was, and I believe, unfortunately, how it will always be.
Wow, very powerful. Everything you say, your message is so realistic. I was going to ask you something, but maybe we can leave it for another time. And I tell the audience, we're doing a podcast together. It's a spoiler, but I wanted to ask you if you're optimistic about the future. Are you asking if others' narratives will fall? You're giving me a more rational explanation than just saying whatever the eight's narrative is matters, as long as we're ready for what is actually going to happen. And I think that's a very good answer. That's a very Jewish answer, like saying Jerusalem wasn't destroyed by Rome, but by our own sins. It's that Jewish idea that our future depends on us. Impressive. I really appreciate you being here. To all the audience, I repeat, I'll always leave the link for social media. And so you can see a perspective that, as I said, when you go in, you'll see and you'll realize where it really leads. Like that echo of a lot of information that reaches the West. Is it really Gaby who's making this big noise on social media, reaching many influential circles? And well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, for the space, and for all the things we're going to do together. Thank you.